Hey guys, tonight we are diving head first into a world of questionable feasts and culinary nightmares. We're going to a medieval banquet, not as a king or a queen, but as a guest, which frankly might be even more dangerous. Your modern stomach, accustomed to things like balanced diets and food safety regulations, is about to face its greatest challenge. Honestly, your digestive system might not survive the first course, let alone the main event, a plate that you are expected to eat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you do that, let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is for you. I love picturing where these stories are landing all over the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gentle hum of your life fades away. It's replaced by a wave of overwhelming noise and smells. You're standing at the threshold of the great hall of a medieval castle, and it's an assault on every one of your senses. The air is thick and hazy with smoke from a massive, roaring fire in a central hearth. The smoke is supposed to find its way out through a hole in the ceiling, but most of it seems to have decided to stay for the party, making your eyes sting and water. The noise is a physical force. It's a cacophony of dozens of people shouting over each other, that booming laughter of a lone minstrel in a corner trying desperately to be heard over the din, and, weaving through it all, the constant, slobbering symphony of dogs. There are dogs everywhere, lean, hungry minus-looking hounds weaving between legs, snarling at each other over scraps, and occasionally resting their heavy heads on a diner's lap with hopeful, pleading eyes. You take a hesitant step forward, your boots sinking slightly into the floor covering. It's no carpet, it's a thick layer of rushes and herbs strewn across the stone flags. This is the mainstream historical reality of the Great Hall. It was the absolute heart of the castle, a multi-purpose room that served as a dining hall, a courtroom, a reception area for visitors, and at night, a communal bedroom for many of the household servants, who would simply wrap themselves in a cloak and sleep right here on the floor. As your eyes adjust to the flickering torchlight, you take in the same, long, rough hewn trestle tables are arranged in rows, crowded with people sitting shoulder to shoulder on hard wooden benches. There is no sense of personal space. Your assigned spot is halfway down a table, and getting there requires a delicate dance of squeezing past people's backs and trying not to step on a sleeping dog. You finally slide onto the bench, though it hardened unforgiving beneath you, and this is where you encounter a wonderfully weird and slightly gross detail of the floor. Those rushes you stepped on were not just for decoration. They were a form of insulation and, in theory, were scattered with sweet smelling herbs like meadowswort and chamomile to freshen the air. The problem is, they weren't changed very often. They were a repository for everything that was dropped or spilled, bones from the meat, grease, spilled ale, and whatever the dogs left behind. When it got to foul, the solution wasn't always to clean it out, but simply to lay a fresh layer of rushes on top. So beneath your feet is a kind of layered, historical lasagna of old dinners and forgotten messes. Historians who study medieval daily life are still debating just how chaotic these feasts really were. Were they the wild, food flinging free for alls that we often see in movies, with people tearing meat apart with their bare hands? Or was there a complex and rigid, if very different, code of etiquette that governed the proceedings? The evidence suggests it was a bit of both. While the scene looks like pure chaos to your modern eyes, there are rules here. You are about to learn them the hard way, and breaking them could get you a swift trap on the knuckles from your neighbor, or worse, the public disapproval of your host. You look at the table before you. It is strangely bare. There are no individual plates, no forks, no water glasses. There is just a communal drinking cup passed among several people, a sharp knife at your spot, and a shared salt cellar. You wonder what you're supposed to eat off of. Just then, a servant comes down the line, placing something in front of each guest. It is heavy, dense, and vaguely plate shape. It is a thick, cross-sectional slice of old, Stale bread. This is your trencher. And your low. Difficult night has just begun. The slab of bread sits before you, a thick, dense disk of baked flour and disappointment. This is your trencher. It's not an appetizer. It is, for all intents and purposes, your plate, your bowl, and your napkin, all rolled into it. It is a few days old, intentionally stale, so that its hard, resilient surface won't immediately disintegrate into a soggy mess under the onslaught of grease and gravy to come. You poke it with your finger. It's unyielding, cool to the touch, and smells faintly of yeast and dust. Before you have more time to contemplate your edible dishware, the feast begins with a sudden, clattering efficiency. Servants move down the tables, placing large, steaming earthenware bowls between every 2 or 3 guests. From the bowl in front of you, a thick, murky minus looking to send up a plume of steam that smells of boiled vegetables, meat, and something vaguely sour. This is pottage, the foundational dish of the medieval diet, and you are expected to share this single bowl with the large, bearded man to your left and the fidgety young squire to your right. This is your first lesson in medieval table manners, a topic that was, believe it or not, of immense importance. The mainstream historical knowledge here is that while their standards of hygiene might seem appalling to you, medieval high society was governed by a strict and complex code of etiquette. Numerous manuals were written on the subject, instructing young nobles on how to behave at table, and the core principle of all these rules was navigating the challenge of communal eating. As you reach for the ladle resting in the pot, the bearded man to your left clears his throat with the subtlety of a rock slide and gives you a pointed look. His eyes flick down to your sleeve, then back to your face. You stop, confused. He then demonstrates, with slow, deliberate movements. He carefully rolls up his own sleeve. He ladles a small amount of the pottage onto his trencher, making sure not to drip on the tablecloth. He breaks off a piece of bread from a nearby basket, not his trencher, and uses that to scoop up the stew. He never puts his half-eaten bread back into the communal bowl. Before drinking from the shared wine cup, he meticulously wipes his greasy mouth on his napkin. The message is clear: do not contaminate the shared resources. Your clothes, your hands, your very spit are all potential pollutants in this delicate ecosystem of shared sustenance. And now you notice the weirder, more specific rules of the game. Aiming across the hall, sneezes violently, turning his head to spray the floor behind him, a move apparently considered more polite than sneezing on the table. Your bearded companion, after a particularly gristly bite, discreetly uses the tip of his knife to dislodge something from his teeth, wiping the blade clean on his tunic. You learn the unwritten rules by observation: don't scratch any itch, no matter how insistent, with your dining hand. Don't blow your nose on the tablecloth your sleeve. However, seems to be a grey area. Spitting is permissible, as long as it's done under the table, not across it. It's a minefield of potential faux pas, a performance of civility in the midst of what feels like a controlled riot. This is where historians still have a lively debate. Did these etiquette manuals reflect the reality of a surprisingly refined and well-minus mannered elite? Or were they a desperate attempt by the upper classes to impose order on their own chaotic lives and to distinguish themselves from the common folk, who presumably ate with even less decorum? The very existence of so many rule books suggests a deep anxiety about doing it wrong. The fact that the rules had to be repeated, generation after generation: don't slurp your soup, don't talk with your mouth full, don't put your dirty fingers in the salt cellar, suggests that a great many people were, in fact, slurping, talking, and sticking their greasy fingers everywhere. The scene before you is a living testament to this debate. For every diner attempting a kind of clumsy grace, there's another happily dipping his beard into the pottage. You carefully roll up your own sleeves, hyper-minus aware of every potential drip. You ladle a small amount of the brownish onto your stale bread plate. The liquid immediately begins to soak into the hard crust, softening it slightly, staining it dark. The first layer of what will become a multi-minus course geological survey of your dinner is now in place. You take a breath, pick up your knife, and prepare to take your first bite of a meal that is destined to haunt you long into the night. You take your first bite of the pottage, using a piece of bread from the communal basket to scoop it up. The stew is surprisingly bland. It's a thick, soupy mash of root vegetables, barley, and some unit and fightable bits of meat, all boiled together for hours into a homogeneous, brownish sludge. It's nourishing, but not exciting. The real star of this first course is in the stew itself, but the relationship it's forming with your plate. You watch as the watery part of the pottage soaks deeper into the dense scrum of your trencher. The hard, stale surface that felt so uninviting just minutes ago is now becoming a dark, damp plate. This is the primary function of your edible dishware. This is the mainstream historical fact of what a trencher truly is. The word itself comes from the old French verb tirer, which means to cut or to slice. And that's exactly what it is, a thick slice of bread, cut from a large, fat loaf that was baked a few days prior. It wasn't meant to be a delicious part of the meal, at least not at first. Its job was to be a sturdy, edible, and, most importantly, disposable plate. It was a grease sponge, a gravy mop, a temporary dam against the tide of sauces that was about to flood the table. You look more closely at the bread itself. It's not the light, airy wheat bread you might associate with a noble's table. It's heavy, with a tight crumb and a dark, thick crust. This is trencher bread, baked specifically for this purpose. Its density was its virtue. A fresh, soft loaf would have turned to mush instantly. This tough, resilient slab could withstand at least a couple of courses before its structural integrity was fatally compromised. Now, as you glance around the hall, you notice a subtle but important detail, a weird little piece of the social hierarchy. While you and everyone at the long trestle tables have a bread trencher, you see that the lord and his family at the high table, sitting on a raised dais, have something different. Their trenchers are not bread. They are squares of polished wood, or in the case of the lord himself, gleaming pewter. These permanent trenchers, or trencher boards, served the same function but were a clear mark of status. The ultimate status symbol, of course, was a plate made of silver, but even a simple wooden one set you apart from the common herd who had to eat their plates. The quality of your dishware, or lack thereof, told everyone in the room exactly where you stood. Historians who study the material culture of the Middle Ages are fascinated by the evolution of tableware, and the trencher is at the heart of a significant debate. What led to the eventual demise of the bread trencher and the rise of the individual plate? Was it, as many assume, a growing concern for hygiene and a new understanding of germs? Or was it part of a larger social shift towards individualism? For most of the medieval period, the focus was on the community, the shared bowl, the shared cup, the shared experience. The idea of having your own personal, untouched plate was a foreign concept. The shift to individual plates in the later Middle Ages and Renaissance, some scholars argue, reflects a profound change in how people saw themselves, a move from a communal identity to a more modern, individual one. The trencher isn't just a plate, it's a symbol of a different way of being in the world. Servants clear the pottage bowls. Your trencher now bears the first stain of the night, a damp, brownish circle in its center. But its main test is yet to come. Another procession of servants emerges from the kitchens, this time carrying shallow platters and jugs. A new smell fills the air, cutting through the smoke and the scent of dogs. It's a powerful, exotic aroma, a complex wave of sweetness, spice, and something sharp and vinegary. They begin to ladle out the next course, small pieces of boiled fish, completely submerged in a thick, vibrant, mustard-yellow sauce. A generous dollop of this pungent sauce is slopped directly onto the center of your trencher, its vibrant color seeping into the pottage minus stained bread. The real flavor assault is about to begin. The dollop of yellow sauce sits on your trencher, the vibrant, almost aggressive splash of color against the drab brown of the pottage stain. You dip the tip of your knife into it for a tentative taste. The flavor is an explosion. It is intensely sour, shockingly sweet, and powerfully spicy, all at the same time. It's a multi-pronged attack on your taste buds. A culinary philosophy so different from modern cooking that it feels alien. This is your introduction to the wild, unbalanced, and utterly unapologetic world of medieval sauces. The mainstream historical knowledge. Here is that medieval European cuisine, particularly for the upper classes, was anything but bland. In fact, it was defined by an obsessive love for potent, complex flavors. Spices were not used subtly to enhance the natural taste of the food. They were used in massive quantities to create a new taste altogether. This sauce, a classic mustard sauce for fish, is a perfect example. The base is likely a mixture of ground mustard seed and verjuice, the incredibly sour juice of unripe grapes. To this, a generous amount of honey or sugar would be added for sweetness. And then comes the spice blend, a powerful combination of ginger, cloves, pepper, and perhaps even grains of paradise, a pungent West African spice that was a popular and cheaper substitute for black pepper. You take a bite of the boiled fish, which is utterly swamped in this powerful concoction. The fish itself is just a texture, a flaky vehicle for the sauce. You can barely taste it. The sauce is the entire point of the dish. This heavy minus-handed approach was partly a matter of status. Spices were astronomically expensive, imported from the Far East along treacherous trade routes. To use them in such vast quantities was a blatant display of wealth, a way for the host to show off his riches and his access to the global luxury market. Your Lord is not just feeding you, he is reminding you of how powerful and important he is. But there's another, weirder reason for these overpowering sauces. A specific detail that speaks volumes about the challenges of medieval food preservation. Without refrigeration, keeping food fresh was a constant struggle. Meat and fish, even when salted or smoked, would often develop a certain off taste, a hint of decay that couldn't be disguised. A powerful, acidic, and heavily spiced sauce was the perfect way to mask these undesirable flavors. It was a form of culinary camouflage. The sauce wasn't just there to add flavor. It was there to hide the lack of freshness. You chew your fish, and you can't help but wonder what exactly this blast of ginger and vinegar is covering up. This leads to a fascinating debate among food historians. Was the medieval love of spice purely aestheticism and a practical way to mask spoiled food? Or did they genuinely have a different palate, or preference for these intense, almost medicinal flavor combinations that we would find overwhelming today? Some scholars argue that, in a world without the fresh, bright flavors of tomatoes, bell peppers, or chilies, all of which were New World crops, unknown in medieval Europe, the flavor spectrum was simply different. They relied on the earthy tones of spices and the sharp tang of vinegar to create excitement. It wasn't that they didn't know better. They were working with a completely different set of ingredients and a different idea of what tasted good. As you try to process this culinary assault, a servant comes by and fills the communal drinking cup. It's not water. Water was often considered unsafe to drink, drawn from questionable wells or rivers. The safe, staple drink for everyone, from children to lords, was ale or beer. The cup is filled with a cloudy, brownish liquid. You take a sip. It's thick, slightly sweet, and has a bready, yeasty flavor, with very little of the bitter hop taste you'd associate with modern beer. It is small ale, low in alcohol and consumed in vast quantities. It does its job, washing away some of the cloying sauce. But it also sits heavy in your stomach, and as you put the cup down, another jug arrives. This one is filled with mead, a sweet, potent wine made from fermented honey. The sweet drinks are flowing, and your trencher, now stained yellow and brown, awaits the next course, the main event. The meat, the real test of its absorbent powers, is about to begin. The remains of the fish course are cleared away, but the evidence of its passing remains on your trencher. A smear of yellow mustard sauce now mingling with the earlier pottage stain. A brief lull settles over the hull as the dogs scurry to clean up any dropped morsels. But this is not a moment of rest. It's the quiet before the storm. The air thickens with anticipation. A trumpet blows a sharp, triumphant blast, and the great doors to the hall swing open. A procession of servants enters, moving with a practiced, theatrical solemnity, and your jaw drops. This is the main event. The centerpiece of the procession, carried by two strong men, is an entire roasted pig. It is immense, its skin cooked to a dark, crackling brown, an apple stuffed in its mouth. It's followed by servants bearing platters piled high with glistening haunches of venison, wrecks of lamb, and more humble dishes of beef and mutton. And then comes the true showstopper, the dish that separates a mere dinner from a magnificent feast of roasted swan, its feathers painstakingly inserted after cooking, its neck gracefully curved as if it were still swimming on a lake. This is the mainstream historical reality of the medieval feast. It was a spectacle of overwhelming abundance, a carnivorous fantasy brought to life. Meat was the ultimate status symbol. In a society where the vast majority of the population subsisted on a diet of bread, vegetables, and grains, the sheer quantity and variety of meat on display at a noble's table was the most powerful possible statement of wealth and privilege. The lord was just eating better than his peasants. He was eating a different category of food entirely. And this one, a bird that was royal property in many kingdoms, was the peak of this culinary pyramid. You didn't just eat it, you consumed its majesty. The servants, armed with massive carving knives, begin to dismantle these roasted beasts with surprising skill, placing huge chunks of meat onto shared platters. A steaming slice of pork, his fat glistening in the torchlight, is placed on the platter nearest you. And now you face a new challenge. There are no serving spoons, no forks. You are expected to get the meat from the central platter to your trencher with your hands and your own personal knife. You watch your experienced neighbor. He spears a manageable piece of venison with the tip of his knife, lifts it to his trencher, and then sets to work. The etiquette is precise. You do not pick up the entire chunk of meat and gnaw on it like a barbarian. You use your knife to cut a small, point-sized piece. You then pick up that single piece with the thumb and first two fingers of your left hand, the dining hand, and pop it into your mouth. It's a delicate, 3-fingered dance of greasy precision. And this is where we find a wonderfully weird and specific detail: the fear of poison. While feasts were a display of hospitality, they were also a time of political maneuvering and simmering rivalries. A host or an important guest always had to be wary of assassination by poison. This led to a series of fascinating rituals. An honored guest might be presented with a piece of assay, a special horn or a piece of unicorn horn, usually gnarl tusk, which was believed to sweat or change color in the presence of poison. The host cupbearer would perform a ritual tasting of the wine before serving it, and sometimes a lord would have a designated carver whose sole job was to taste a tiny sliver of each piece of meat before serving it to his master. The feast was a performance of trust, but one that was underpinned by a deepened, justifiable paranoia. Historians who study medieval politics and courtly life see these feasts as incredibly important political events. They weren't just about eating. They were about cementing alliances, negotiating treaties, and displaying power. The seating arrangement was a meticulously planned map of the social and political hierarchy. Who sat closest to the lord? Who was served first? Who was given the best cut of meat? These were all signals of favor or disfavor, watched closely by everyone in the hall. The academic debate often centers on how to read the accounts of these feasts. Are the chroniclers' descriptions of the food just culinary details, or are they a coded language for describing the political climate of the court? You follow your neighbor's lead, using your knife and fingers to transfer a heavy piece of pork onto your trencher. The hot grease immediately begins to seep into the bread, a fresh layer of liquid fat soaking into the already stained surface. The bread grinds under the weight. You cut a piece, pop it in your mouth. It's rich, salty, and incredibly fatty. You take a long pull of the sweetmeat to cut through the grease, and you realize with a sinking feeling that this is just the first of many waves of meat to come. Your stomach, already heavy with pottage and ale, sends up its first, quiet protest. The onslaught of meat is relentless. Just as you finish your piece of pork, the platter is whisked away and replaced with one bearing thick slices of venison, dark and rich. The sheer volume of food is staggering, a deliberate performance of overwhelming abundance. Your trencher, your loyal, absorbent friend, is now taking a serious beating. The pork grease has saturated the top layer, creating a translucent, fatty sheen. The new slice of venison adds a darker, reddish stain, its juices mingling with the pork fat, the mustard sauce, and the ghost of the pottage into a single, brownish, culinary primordial soup. This is the very essence of your dining experience, a challenge of both etiquette and endurance, and your main tool in this challenge, the extension of your own hand, is your knife. This is the mainstream historical fact about medieval cutlery. The four, as you know it, did not exist at this table. While some pronged fork like implements were used in the kitchen for lifting meat from cauldrons, their appearance at the dinner table was seen as scandalously effeminate and ridiculously affected. Particularly in England and France, a man used his hands and his knife. Your knife is your personal, all minus purpose tool. You brought it with you. It's not part of a set provided by the host. Everyone, from the lowest squire to the highest lord, carried their own. It was used for cutting your food, for spearing pieces from the communal platter, for scraping your trencher, and, in a pinch, for defending your honor. The etiquette of its use was paramount. You never, ever lit your knife clean. You wiped it on a piece of bread, not your trencher, or your napkin, and you certainly never gesticulated with it, lest you inadvertently threaten your dining companion. It was a tool of civilization, but one that was never far removed from its more violent potential. You watch as the man across from you deftly cuts a piece of venison, his movements practiced and efficient. He then does something that catches you by surprise. He uses the tip of his knife to spare a small piece, dips it into the communal salt cellar, and offers it to his neighbor. This is a sign of friendship and respect, a small act of intimacy in the midst of the formal chaos. Sharing salt was a powerful social bond. This leads to a weird and specific detail: the salt cellar itself. At a high minus status feast, the salt cellar, or in the F, could be an incredibly elaborate object, often shaped like a ship, crafted from silver or gold, and placed in a position of honor on the table. Where you sat in relation to the salt was a direct indication of your status. To be below the salt was to be of a lower rank. Seated far from the lord and his honored guests, the salt cellar was not just a dispenser, it was a social landmark. This constant negotiation of personal space and shared resources leads to an interesting debate among historians and anthropologists. How did this style of eating shape social relationships? Did the constant sharing from communal bowls and platters foster a greater sense of community and interdependence? Or did it create a heightened sense of anxiety about pollution and social boundaries, leading to the incredibly rigid etiquette rules you are trying so desperately to follow? The evidence points to both. It was a system that forced a high degree of social intimacy, while simultaneously creating a complex set of rules to manage that same intimacy. Your every gesture is a form of communication, a signal of your breeding, your respect for your host, and your awareness of your place in the social order. You manage to eat a few bites of the venison, which is tougher than the pork and has a strong, gummy flavor. The richness is starting to overwhelm you. Your stomach, now laden with pottage, ale, fish, pork, venison, and sweetmeat, feels heavy and bloated. You look down at your trencher. It is a sorry sight. It's no longer a plate. It's a swamp. It has absorbed so much liquid that its structural integrity is beginning to fail. It sags in the middle, a greasy, reeking wound on the tablecloth. You poke it with your knife, and the knife goes in with a soft, squelching sound. Just as you think you can't possibly eat another bite, a trumpet sounds again. The meat platters are removed. A wave of relief washes over you. It's over. But it's not. This is merely a pause, an intermission. A new procession emerges from the kitchen. But this time, they are not carrying food for consumption. They are carrying a spectacle. The trumpets signal not an end, but a strategic pause in the culinary assault. The servants clear the meat platters, leaving behind a battlefield of greasy trenchers and stained tablecloth. The air, thick with the smells of roasted fat and sweat, now takes on a new note of anticipation. This is the moment for the Sotelte, or subtlety, a course designed not for the stomach, but for the eyes and the mind. A new procession enters the hall, and this time, what they carry is a work of art. It's a magnificent, edible sculpture, a meticulously crafted castle made entirely of spun sugar, almond paste, and gilded gingerbread. It has tiny turrets, crenellated walls, and the working drawbridge. A collective gasp of wonder ripples through the hall. This is the mainstream historical context of the Sotelte. It was a form of spectacular, edible entertainment, a way for the host to display not just his wealth, but the incredible skill of his kitchen staff. These sculptures could depict anything from mythological scenes and heraldic beasts to political allegories. A feast celebrating a military victory might feature a sugar sculpture of the enemy's fortress being crushed by a giant lion representing the king. You stare at the sugar castle, mesmerized. It's a moment of pure, frivolous beauty in the midst of the gross, functional reality of the feast. It serves as a visual palate cleanser, a sophisticated intermission that allows your stomach a moment of respite before the next wave of food arrives. It's also a powerful conversation starter, a piece of political theater meant to be admired and interpreted by the guests. And this is where we get into the weird and wonderful specifics of these edible illusions. The Sotelte wasn't always aesthetic sculpture. The most ambitious chefs created interactive, almost mechanical, subtleties. A pastry dragon might be rigged to breathe real fire by igniting a small pouch of flammable spices in its mouth. A miniature ship could have masts and sails made of hardened sugar, floating in a bowl of jellied wine sea. These were the special effects of the medieval banquet, designed to elicit guests of shock and delight. They were a testament to the chef's ingenuity, turning him from a simple cook into a master illusionist. The academic debate among food historians and performance study scholars about subtleties is fascinating. Were these objects primarily works of art, to be judged on their aesthetic merit, or were they tools of political propaganda, meant to convey a very specific message to the assembled guests? The answer is almost certainly both. The symbolism was often deeply layered. A sculpture of St. George slaying the dragon, for example, could be a simple, pious image, but if the dragon was decorated with the coat of arms of a political rival, the message became far more pointed. The Sotelte was a way of talking politics without saying a word. The sugar castle is placed on the high table, a shimmering testament to the Lord's power. It will be admired, discussed, and then, at the end of the feast, broken apart and distributed to the most honored guests. For now, it serves its purpose as a magnificent distraction. The conversation in the hall shifts from gossip and crude jokes to murmurs of admiration for the confectioner's skill. This brief moment of refined wonder gives your stomach a chance to send a clear, urgent message to your brain. It is a message of profound distress. The sheer volume of rich, fatty meat, combined with the sweet, heavy ale and mead, has created a dense, indigestible mass in your gut. You feel a low, churning pressure building. You discreetly loosen the belt of your tunic, but it offers little relief. Just as you are contemplating the grim reality of your digestive state, another trumpet blast announces that the intermission is over. A new, even more theatrical dish is brought forth, one that promises to combine food and entertainment in the most startling way possible. It is a pie, a single, enormous, golden minus-crusted pie, so large it takes 2 servants to carry it, and you can hear something moving inside. The great pie is placed in the center of the hall, its golden crust gleaming in the torchlight. It is a magnificent sight, a fortress of pastry, but it is the sound coming from within that captures everyone's attention, a frantic, fluttering, chirping sound that is unmistakably the sound of living birds. The whole fool silent, all eyes fixed on the pie. This is not just a dish, it's a magic trick, a piece of culinary theater designed to astound and delight. The Lord's chief steward approaches the pie with a large, ornate knife. He taps the crust theatrically, and the chirping from within intensifies. Then, with a dramatic flourish, he plunges the knife and uncuts a large opening in the top. The effect is immediate and spectacular. A cloud of small birds, larks, finches, and spurs erupt from the pie, fluttering up into the smoky rafters of the great hall in a confused, chaotic flurry. The guests roar with laughter and applause, some even swatting at the birds as they fly past. This is the famous for -20 blackbirds baked in a pie from the nursery rhyme, brought to vivid, startling life. This is a mainstream, if high-end, feature of medieval and Renaissance banquets. The trick was relatively simple. A huge, empty pastry shell, a coffin, as it was called, would be baked first. Separately, a dish of actual, edible bird pie would be cut. Just before serving, the live birds would be placed into the pre-baked shell. The lid would be put on, and the whole contraption would be presented to the guests. The live birds were purely for the spectacle. You would then be served a slice from the other, non-living pie. It was the ultimate surprise inside, a moment of pure, joyful chaos. And now for the weirdly specific variations on this theme. Birds were not the only thing to emerge from a surprise pie. For a particularly ribald feast, a door for a small child might be hidden inside, leaping out to the astonishment of the guests, sometimes dressed as a court jester to recite a poem or sing a song. An even stranger, and hopefully rare, account describes a pie filled with live frogs, which would then hop all over the table and the guests, causing a mixture of horror and amusement. The goal was to break the formality, to create a moment of unforgettable, anarchic fun. The pie was not just food, it was a party game. The historical debate around this practice often centers on its meaning. Was it simply a display of incredible wealth and the skill of a master baker? A way of showing you had enough resources to waste on such a frivolous spectacle? Or did it have deeper symbolic root? Some scholars have argued that the release of the birds could be seen as a symbol of the soul ascending to heaven, a kind of pious allegory hidden within a party tree. Others see it as a celebration of the Lord's power over nature itself. He can command not just the beasts of the field to be roasted for his table, but the very birds of the air to be baked into his pies. It was a demonstration of a power that bordered on the divine. As the last of the birds find perches in the high rafters, and the excitement dies down, the servants begin to circulate with slices of the actual bird pie. A small piece is plopped onto your beleaguered trencher. The flaky pastry immediately absorbs the remaining surface grease, adding another layer to your edible archaeological dig. The filling is a dense mixture of minced bird meat, suet, and dried fruits, heavily seasoned with the familiar blend of ginger, cloves, and saffron. It is rich, greasy, and sweet, all at the same time. You take a single, obligatory bite. Your stomach, which had been enjoying its brief respite, churns in protest. The combination of fatty pork, gourmet venison, and now, the sweet, spiced, greasy bird meat is a culinary declaration of war on your digestive system. You feel a wave of nausea, and you push the rest of the pie away. The feast, which began as an exciting novelty, has become a grueling ordeal. You look around at the other guests, their faces flushed with food and drink, and you wonder how they can possibly continue. Just then, the minstrel in the corner, who has been silent during the pie spectacle, strikes a loud chord on his lute, signaling that the next phase of the evening's entertainment is about to begin. The final, greasy bite of bird pies, it's like a stone in your churning stomach. The flurry of excitement from the live bird spectacle has died down, and a kind of weary, rooted silence descends upon the whole, punctuated by the occasional belch or the gnawing of a dog on a discarded bone. The feast has reached a tipping point. The initial hunger and excitement have been replaced by a state of mere catatonic fullness. This is the moment for a different kind of nourishment, a diversion to occupy the mind while the body wages its silent, desperate war against digestion. The minstrel, who had been a peripheral figure all evening, now takes center stage. He moves to the center of the hall, stands on a low stool to be seen, and strikes another chord on his lute. He is a classic figure of the medieval court, a traveling musician and storyteller. His tunic is colorful, it's slightly frayed, patchwork. His face is weathered, a roadmap of 1,000 miles traveled and 1,000 stories told. Here's your evening's television, your podcast, and your playlist, all rolled into one. This is the mainstream historical role of the bard or minstrel. In an age before widespread literacy, these performers were the living repositories of news, history, and literature. They traveled from castle to castle, town to town, exchanging their songs and stories for a meal, a bed, and a few coins. They sang epic poems about legendary heroes like Charlemagne and King Arthur, recited tragic romances, and passed on the latest courtly gossip and news of distant wars. They were a vital part of the cultural fabric, weaving together a shared sense of history and identity for their audiences. The minstrel begins to sing. His voice is a high, reedy tenor, and he sings in a language you can understand, but with a formal, poetic cadence that feels ancient. He sings a chanson digeste, an epic song of deeds, telling the story of a brave knight on a perilous quest to rescue a noble lady from a dragon-minus guarded tower. The story is a familiar one, a classic tale of chivalry and courtly love. The knight is impossibly brave, the lady impossibly beautiful, and the dragon impossibly fierce. As you listen, you notice a weirdly specific detail about his performance. He doesn't just sing the words, he acts them out. When he describes the knight riding his noble steed, he prances in a small circle. When he sings of the sword fight, he uses his lute as a makeshift sword, swinging it through the air. And when he imitates the lady's tearful plea, he adopts a comically high-pitched, falsetto voice. It's a one-man show, a combination of music, storytelling, and amateur dramatics. The performance is not subtle, but it is utterly captivating. The academic debate among literary historians and musicologists about these performances is lively. How much of what they sang was memorized from a fixed, traditional text, and how much was improvised on the spot? The evidence suggests a combination of both. A skilled minstrel would have a vast repertoire of traditional stories and melodies, but he would tailor his performance to his audience. For a noble court, he might emphasize the themes of chivalry and noble lineage. For a roadier audience at a town fair, he might add more bawdy jokes and slapstick humor. They were not just reciting. They were constantly creating their material. The story you are hearing tonight has likely been told 1,000 times, but never in exactly this way. The minstrel's song wins its way through daring escapes, noble sacrifices, and epic battles. For a while, you are lost in the story. It is a welcome distraction, a journey for your mind that allows you to forget, for a few precious minutes, the grueling physical journey your dinner is taking through your digestive tract. The music is simple, the rhymes predictable, but the story is timeless. You find yourself leaning forward, caught up in the fate of the brave knight. But then, the song ends. The knight has rescued the lady, the dragon is slain, and they live happily ever after. The minstrel takes a deep, theatrical bow to scatter, drunken applause, and as the story fades, reality comes crashing back in. The distraction is over. You are back in the smoky, noisy hole, and your stomach feels heavier and more distressed than ever. And just as you think that surely, the meal must be over, a new procession of servants comes through the door, carrying platters of food that seem designed to challenge your senses in a whole new and deeply unpleasant way. They are carrying fish. Again, the last notes of the minstrel's lute die away, leaving a void that is quickly filled by the returning clatter of a feast not yet ready to admit defeat. Just when you thought your stomach couldn't possibly accommodate another morsel, a new wave of dishes arrives. But this course is different. It is not the triumphant, celebratory meat course. It is a course of fish, and the smell that precedes it is not the rich aroma of roasting fat, but a sharp, pungent, and deeply funky odor of preservation. Servants place platters on the table laden with a dizzying array of seafood. There are thick, pinkish steaks of salted salmon, glistening eels jellied into a trembling loaf, then, most imposing of all, whole pickled herrings, their silvery skins dulled by vinegar, their eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. This is the mainstream historical reality of fish consumption in medieval Europe. In a world without refrigeration, Fresh fish was a luxury available only to those living right on the coast or a riverbank. For everyone else, fish meant preserved fish, salted, smoked, dried, or pickled. This was especially important because of the dictates of the church. The Christian calendar was filled with fast days every Friday, the season of Lent, and numerous other vigils and saints' days when the consumption of meat was forbidden. This fasting didn't mean you didn't eat. It meant you ate fish instead. This created a massive, year-round demand for preserved fish, making it one of the most important commodities in the medieval economy. The great herring fisheries of the North Sea and the cod fisheries of the Atlantic were the engines of a vast international trade network. The fish on your platter has likely traveled hundreds of miles and passed through the hands of dozens of merchants to get here. You look at the pickled herring. Its sour, vinegar smell making your nostrils twitch. Your host is not serving this because it's a fast day. He is serving it to display the breadth of his larder, to show that he can afford not just fresh meat, but expensive, imported, preserved delicacies as well. It's another subtle flex of his wealth and power. And now you notice a weirdly specific detail, a true culinary curiosity of the era. One of the dishes is something you can't immediately identify. It's a flaky, white fish that has been pounded into a kind of paste, then reshaped to look like something else entirely, in this case, a leg of lamb, complete with a fake bone made from a carved piece of wood. This is a dish known as counterfeit meat. During Lent, when a lordly household was craving the familiar sight of a roast, the chef would use his skill to create these elaborate fish-based illusions. They might make fish sausages or a fish-based venison pie. It was a way to adhere to the letter of the religious law while creatively defying its spirit. It was a testament to the chef's skill and his master's yearning for meat. The academic debate among food historians regarding this practice is fascinating. Was this counterfeiting of meat a sign of piety, a way to make the sacrifice of fasting more bearable by mimicking the desired food? Or was it a sign of a growing secularism, a kind of subtle mockery of the church's rules? The answer is likely complex. It probably varied from household to household. For some, it may have been a sincere attempt to maintain the visual traditions of the feast within the constraints of religious observance. For others, it might have been a winking, tongue-and-cheek game, a way to show that even when fasting, a great lord's table would still look as magnificent as ever. You feel obligated to try something. You use your knife to cut a small piece of the salted salmon. The texture is firm, almost leathery, and the taste is an overwhelming wave of salt. It's so salty it makes your tongue feel dry and puckered. You immediately reach for the ale cup to wash it down. The saltness, combined with the lingering sweetness of the meat and the richness of the meat, creates a deeply unpleasant chemical party in your mouth and a fresh wave of rebellion in your stomach. You look down at your trencher. The salty fish oil has now joined the party, adding a new, glistening layer to the greasy strata of pork, venison, and bird. The bread is now completely saturated. A soft, heavy, weeping sponge of a thing. It has lost all pretense of being a plate. It is now simply a mess. And as you stare at it, wondering what fresh horror could possibly come next, a new dish arrives. It is brightly colored, wobbles precariously, and contains things that have no business being suspended in jelly. The assault of salt from the preserved fish is still tingling on your tongue when the next dish arrives, and it is a marvel of medieval food engineering. A servant places a large platter on the table, and on it sits a trembling, shimmering, jewel-tone milk. It is a savory jelly, or as pick, a dish of profound historical importance and, to your modern eyes, profound visual horror. This one is a vibrant, almost unnatural green, colored with spinach or parsley juice, and suspended within its translucent depths, like prehistoric creatures trapped in amber, are whole-boiled eggs, chunks of pale chicken meat, and slivers of unidentifiable vegetables. This is the mainstream historical context of the jellied dish, a staple of aristocratic cuisine across Europe, in an age before gelatin packets. Making a clear, firm jelly was a sign of a highly skilled and well-equipped kitchen. The process was laborious and expensive. The gelatin was derived from boiling down animal parts rich in collagen, typically calves' feet, pigs' trotters, or the swim bladders of certain fish, especially sturgeon, which produced the clearest and most prized jelly, known as isinglass. The stock had to be boiled for hours, clarified with egg whites, and then carefully seasoned and colored to create a multi-layered jelly with different colors and suspended ingredients was the mark of a true culinary artist. A slice of the green, wobbly creation is plopped onto what remains of your trencher. It doesn't soak in so much as it just sits there, a quivering, alien presence. You poke it with your knife. It jiggles menacingly. This dish was not just food. It was a spectacle. A perfectly clear as pick was a symbol of purity and refinement. The vibrant colors, derived from natural sources like saffron for yellow, sandalwood for red, or violets for purple, turned the feast into a visual banquet as well as a physical one. And now for the weird and specific detail, the sheer strangeness of what could be jellied. It wasn't just chicken or eggs. Cooks would encase almost anything in as pet. An entire poached fish might be set in a pale, wine-flavored jelly to make it look like it was swimming. Crayfish, small birds, and even decorative arrangements of fruits and flowers could be suspended in this edible preservation medium. The goal was to create a beautiful, jewel-like object, a kind of temporary mosaic. The taste was oft unsecondary to the visual effect. The jelly itself was often quite bland, or flavored with the familiar sweet minus and minus, our combination of wine, vinegar, and spices. It was, in essence, a very pretty, very wobbly way to eat leftovers. The academic debate around this pick is quite interesting. Food historians argue about its purpose. Was it primarily a preservation method, a way to keep cooked meats fresh for longer by sealing them away from the air? Or was its main function aesthetic and symbolic? The evidence suggests it was both. It was a practical solution to the problem of leftovers in a grand household, but it was elevated to an art form, a way to transform simple cooked meat into a dazzling centerpiece. It represents the medieval love of transformation and illusion, of turning the mundane into the magical. You feel the eyes of your neighbors on you. To refuse a dish would be an insult to your host. You summon your courage, cut a small piece of the trembling green mound, and lift it to your mouth. The texture is the first thing you notice. It's cold, slippery, and gelatinous. It dissolves on your tongue into a cool, faintly herbaceous liquid. Then you get a chunk of the chicken, which is tender but completely flavorless, and a piece of boiled egg. The combination is disconcerting. It's a textural nightmare, a mix of slippery, soft, and firm that your brain has trouble processing. It's not actively unpleasant, but it is deeply, profoundly strange. You look down at your trencher one more time. A small puddle of green, semi-minus melted jelly is now forming, its edges mingling with the salty fish oil and the dark grease from the roasted meats. The bread has reached its absolute saturation point. It is a single, sodden, multi-minus colored mass. Its original purpose as a plate now a distant, laughable memory. The feast, you pray, must surely be winding down. The sun has set. The hole is darker and smokier than ever, and your stomach feels like a tightly packed suitcase that is about to burst. And then, a new smell fills the air, the sweet, comforting scent of baking and honey. The final courses are coming. The desserts. The savory, fishy funk is fading, replaced by a scent that is so welcome, so deeply comforting. It feels like a pardon from the governor. It is the smell of hot metal, honey, and toasted grain. This must be it. The final act, the sweet, gentle end to this marathon of gluttony. A wave of profound relief washes over you. Your stomach, which has been bracing for the next assault, dares to unclench just a little. The desserts have arrived. A servant comes down the line carrying not a heavy platter, but a basket filled with what look like thin, pale, disc-shaped crackers. He places a small stack of them directly onto the tablecloth beside your trencher. Following him is another servant carrying a small bowl of dark, glistening honey and another of thick, spiced wine, heated until it steams. This, you are told, is Hippocras, And these are wafers. This is the mainstream historical finale to a grand medieval feast. Wafers were not the airy, cream-filled things you might imagine. They were thin, crisp, unleavened biscuits, made from a simple batter of flour, water, and sometimes egg or sugar. The batter was poured into a long handled, circular iron press, which was then held over the fire. These wafering irons were often intricately engraved with a coat of arms, a religious scene, or a geometric pattern, which would be imprinted on the finished biscuit. They were a light, elegant, and fashionable way to conclude a heavy meal. You pick one up. It is light as air and snaps with a satisfying crack. The surface is embossed with the image of a stag, the symbol of your host's house. You dip a corner into the bowl of honey and take a bite. The taste is one of pure, unadulterated sweetness. The wafer itself is subtly sweet, but the addition of the honey makes it a powerful blast of sugar. After a meal dominated by the aggressive flavors of salt, vinegar, and heavy spice, this straightforward sweetness feels both wonderful and slightly shocking. And now you notice a weird and wonderful detail, the Hippocras. This is not just mulled wine. It is a medieval superminor strength, a kind of medicinal digestive. It was typically a red wine, sweetened with a large amount of sugar or honey, and then infused with a potent cocktail of hot spices, believed to aid digestion: ginger, cinnamon, cloves, grains of paradise, and nutmeg. The mixture was then filtered multiple times through a special cloth bag called a monicum hippocratica, or sleeve of Hippocrates, which gave the drink its name. It was, in essence, a sweet, alcoholic, and highly spiced health tonic. The academic debate among food and medical historians about Hippocras is fascinating. Was it genuinely considered effective medicine, based on the humoral theory that hot spices would help the stomach cook a heavy meal, or was it simply a delicious and luxurious way to consume even more expensive sugar and spices? A final, liquid demonstration of the host's wealth. The fact that it was named after Hippocrates, the father of medicine, suggests a sincere belief in its therapeutic properties, but the fact that it was also delicious and intoxicating suggests its popularity was likely due to more than just its health benefit. You take a sip of the warm, spiced wine. It is incredibly sweet, the spices creating a pleasant, burning sensation in your throat. It does feel like it's doing something in your stomach, though whether it's aiding digestion or simply starting a new, sugary fire is unclear. You take another wafer and dip it in the honey. The sugar rush hits your overloaded system with surprising force. It's not a gentle, calming sweetness. It's an energetic, jangling sweetness that makes your teeth ache and your head feel slightly light. You look down at your trencher. A few drops of honey have fallen onto its tragic surface, creating small, golden pools on top of the greasy, congealed layers of fish oil and meat fat. It is a monument to culinary excess, a timeline of your dinner, from the humble pottage to this final, sticky end. The wafers are consumed. The Hippocras is drunk. A feeling of finality settles over the whole. This has to be the end. But medieval feasts, you are learning, do not follow the logic of a modern meal. They follow a logic of relentless presentation. And just as you are preparing to heave your bloated body from the bench, one last, small course arrives, not sweet, but savory. A final, salty counterpoint to the sugary excess of the wafers. The servants are coming around with cheese. The sugary, spiced wine haze from the Hippocras is just beginning to settle over your exhausted brain when the final, unexpected course makes its appearance. There are no trumpets this time, no grand procession. Servants move quietly down the tables, carrying wooden platters. On the more large, rough looking wheels of cheese in shallow bowls filled with nuts and dried fruits. This is the last gasp of the feast, a final, savory salvo designed as a digestive aid and the last chance to linger over the dregs of the wine. A servant uses a knife to cut a thick, crumbly wedge from a large love tail. Then he cheese and places it on a clean spot on the tablecloth near you. This is the mainstream historical role of cheese at a medieval banquet. It wasn't typically part of the main meal, but was served at the very end, a practice known as the void. This wasn't a course in the modern sense, but a way to signal the transition from formal dining to a more relaxed, post-dinner phase of drinking and conversation. The cheese placed before you is not a mild, creamy brie. It is a hard, aged cheese, likely made from sheep's or goat's milk. It has a thick, tough rind and a powerful, pungent smell, sharp, salty, and unapologetically funky. The aroma cuts through the sweet, cloying air left by the wafers and Hippocras. Cheese, in your time, is a staple food, a way of preserving milk in a stable, portable, and long-lasting form. But the quality and type of cheese you ate was a clear indicator of your social standing. The common folk might eat a simple, fresh green cheese, while a lord's table, like this one, would feature aged, hard cheeses that required more resources and time to produce. You break off a small, crumbly piece. The texture is dry and slightly gritty, and the flavor is an intense, salty blast that makes your tongue tingle. It is so strong that it almost feels medicinal, and in a way, it was thought to be. According to the prevailing humoral theory, a strong, aged cheese was considered hot and dry. Therefore, eating a small amount at the end of a meal was believed to help close the stomach and aid in the cooking or digestion of all the cold and moist foods you had consumed earlier. It was a final, corrective dose of heat for your burdened digestive system. And now for the weird and specific detail, the nuts. Alongside the cheese, you offered a handful of walnuts and hazelnuts. While they seem like a simple snack, they too had a place in the medical thinking of the day. Walnuts, because their convoluted, wrinkly shells resembled a human skull, were believed by some proponents of the doctrine of signatures to be good for the brain. But more commonly, nuts were, like cheese, considered hot and dry, and therefore a good way to counteract a rich, moist meal. However, they came with a warning. Physicians cautioned against eating too many, as their hot nature could lead to headaches, chills, and, ironically, indigestion. You are essentially being served a small plate of edible, self-contradictory medical advice. The academic debate among food historians here often revolves around the regional ety of cheese. Unlike spices, which were part of a global trade, cheese was intensely local. A cheese from a particular valley in the Alps would be completely different from one made on the plains of England. Historians try to reconstruct these lost flavors and traditions, debating the impact of local grazing lands, specific animal breeds, and secretive, monastery-held recipes on the final product. The wedge of cheese on your table is not just food. It's a taste of the local terroir, a product of this specific place and its unique history. You nibble on the cheese and a few nuts. The salty, earthy flavors are strange but not entirely unwelcome contrast to the cloying sweetness of the previous course. But your stomach, a chaotic cauldron of conflicting textures and flavors, is not grateful for this final addition. The cheese sits on top of the pile, a heavy, salty lid on an already overflowing pot. The feast is finally, definitively over. The last of the wine is being drunk. The guests are beginning to stir, their conversations growing louder and more sluggish. It is time to go. But, as you prepare to push yourself away from the table, your eyes fall one last time on the object that has been your silent companion all night, your trencher. It is a disaster area, a swampy, multi-colored, grease-soap, honey-drizzled, cheese-crumb-dusted wreck, and you realize, with a dawning, sickening horror, that your duty to the feast is not yet complete. You still have to deal with your plate. The last of the cheese has been eaten, the last of the wind drunk. The great hall is winding down, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and the satisfied groans of several dozen overstuffed men. The clamor of the feast has subsided into a low, drunken murmur. It is time for the final reckoning. Your eyes are drawn, as if by a terrible magnetic force, back to your trencher. It lies on the tablecloth before you, no longer a plate, but an artifact. It is a testament to the entire evening's journey. At its core is the original, dense bread, now almost completely obscure. You can see the dark stain from the pottage, the lurid yellow smear of the mustard sauce, the deep, greasy sheen from the pork and venison, the flaky remnants of the bird pie, the ghostly shimmer of the jellied pick, a sticky golden dot of honey, and a few stray crumbs of pungent cheese. It is a single, solid, heavy object, a geological cross-minus section of your dinner. And now, you face the question that has been looming all night: what happens to it? This is the mainstream historical fate of the trencher. After serving its purpose as a plate, it was not necessarily thrown away. You had a choice. You could, if you were still hungry or simply didn't want to waste it, eat it. This was your plate. After all, or in a gesture of pious charity, you could give it away. You look around and see both options playing out. The young, still minus growing squire to your right, whose appetite seems to be a bottomless pit, has picked up his own sorry minus looking trencher and is gnawing on it with a kind of grim determination, his jaw working hard to get through the tough, grease minus soaked crust. Your more refined, bearded neighbor to the left, however, is doing something different. He carefully pushes his trencher to the edge of the table. A servant comes by with a large, woven basket, the alms basket, and sweeps the trencher into it. This basket, filled with the leftover trenchers and other scraps from the high table, will be taken out to the castle gates and distributed to the poor, the beggars and humble travelers who have gathered there, waiting for just such a handout. This act of giving away your used, soggy bread plate was seen as an important act of Christian charity, a way for the wealthy to perform their piety and share their abundance with the less fortunate. The lord of the castle gains not just a full belly, but also a polished soul, his generosity on full display. But now for the weirdly specific and slightly disgusting detail. While the trencher was a form of charity, it wasn't always a very good one. Imagine being one of the poor waiting at the gate. You are handed this slab of stale bread, which is cold, heavy, then saturated with a congealed mixture of fat, fish oil, and sweet sauces from a meal you never saw. It might be nourishing, providing a much minus needed calorie boost, but it would also be a tough, leathery, and often rancid minus tasting thing. Furthermore, the dogs, who had been roaming the hall all night, often had first pick of the fallen scraps and even the trenches themselves, adding a layer of canine saliva to the already complex flavor profile. It was charity, yes, but charity with an asterisk. This practice leads to a fascinating debate among historians who study poverty and social class in the Middle Ages. Was the giving of alms, like the trencher basket, a genuine act of compassion, a system that effectively redistributed surplus food to the needy? Or was it more of a symbolic gesture, a way for the rich to feel good about themselves and reinforce the social hierarchy, giving away something they considered little more than garbage? The truth is likely complex. For the Lord, it was a performance of piety. For the beggar at the gate, it was a real, if unappetizing, meal. The trencher exists in that grey area between generosity and content. You are now faced with this choice. Your stomach churns at the very thought of eating another bite of anything, let alone this monstrosity. You want to push it towards the alms basket, but the squire to your right has just finished his and is now eyeing yours with a hopeful, hungry look. To give it to him would be a friendly gesture. To give it to the alms basket would be a pious one. But a third option, one that feels both wasteful and deeply necessary, occurs to you. You could just leave it. You hesitate, but the squire is insistent, and wasting what is technically food feels wrong. With a sigh of profound resignation that seems to come from your very soul, you push the heavy, sodden disc of bread across the table towards him. He grins, picks it up, and begins to eat your dinner all over again. You watch, with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration, as the squire demolishes your abandoned trencher. He tackles it with the same gusto he applied to his own, his strong young jaw making short work of the tough, multi-minus flavored crust. Each bite he takes feels like a fresh insult to your own protesting stomach. The sight of him happily consuming the congealed history of your dinner is the final push you need. It is time to escape. You rise from the bench, your body stiffened protesting. The simple act of standing up sends a fresh wave of pressure through your abdomen. You feel heavy, bloated, and profoundly unwell. You mutter your excuses to your neighbors, who are now engaged in a loud, drunken argument about the merits of a particular breed of hunting hawk. They barely notice you go. Making your way out of the great hall is as challenging as making your way in. You have to navigate the same obstacle course of benches, dogs, and discarded bones, but now you are doing it in a state of advanced digestive distress. The earth, which was merely smoky and noisy at the beginning of the night, now seems thick with the accumulated smells of stale wine, sweat, and the collective exhalations of 100 overfed bodies. It is suffocating. This is the mainstream historical reality of the end of a feast. It wasn't a polite, orderly affair. As the night wore on and the drink flowed, the carefully constructed etiquette began to fray. Arguments would break out. The minstrel's gentle songs would be replaced by boisterous, off-minor geese singing from the guests. The formal feast would devolve into a rowdy, communal drinking session. Your quiet, early departure is a sign of your weakness, your inability to keep pace with the relentless festivity. You finally reach the great doors and push your way out into the cool night air of the castle bailey. The change in temperature and atmosphere is a shock. The cold, clean air feels wonderful on your face, a blessed relief after the smoky effugy of the hall. But it brings its own problems. The sudden chill on your overheated body causes your stomach to clench violently. A sharp, cramping pain shoots through your gut, making you double over for a moment, gasping. This brings us to a weird and specific detail of medieval health, the fear of a surfeit. A surfeit was the medical term for any illness caused by overindulgence, particularly overeating. It was believed that consuming too much rich food, especially when mixed with wine and ale, could overwhelm the stomach's ability to cook the food, leading to a dangerous imbalance of the humors. The symptoms were bloating, indigestion, vomiting, and in the most severe cases, it was thought to lead to fever and even death. King Henry I of England was famously said to have died from a surfeit of lampreys. While it was likely food poisoning, the diagnosis of the time was simply that he had eaten too much of his favorite dish. Your current, painful state would be instantly diagnosed by a medieval physician as a classic textbook surfeit. The academic debate among medical historians is whether surfeit was a real, distinct medical condition or a moralizing, catch-old term for the consequences of gluttony. In a society where gluttony was one of the 7 deadly sins, an illness caused by it had a powerful moral dimension. It was seen as a physical manifestation of a spiritual failing. The pain you are feeling now is not just a physiological reaction. It is a form of divine punishment for your lack of moderation. The feast was a celebration of abundance, but it was also a test of your self-control. And it is a test you have clearly failed. You straighten up, breathing slowly, waiting for the cramp to pass. The castle courtyard is quiet, lit by a few flickering torches in the high, cold light of the moon. You see a few other guests staggering out of the hall, their faces pale, their steps unsteady. You are not alone in your suffering. This shared misery is the true, unspoken final course of the great medieval feast. Your own chamber is in a separate building across the bailey. The short walk feels like a monumental journey. Every step sends a jolt through your tightly packed abdomen. You finally reach your door, lift the latch, and stumble into the darkness of your room. Your only thought to get horizontal as quickly as possible. You strip off your tunic, kick off your boots, and collapse onto your lumpy straw bed, the ropes groaning in protest. You lie on your bed, staring up into the darkness, and listen to the slow, agonizing, gurgling rebellion that is taking place inside you. The night is far from over. You lie on the lumpy straw mattress, a prisoner in your own body. The relative quiet of your chamber is a stark contrast to the chaos of the great hall, but it offers no comfort. Every groan of the house, every rustle of the straw beneath you, seems to be mocking your internal turmoil. Your stomach is a battlefield, a churning, gurgling theater of war where the fatty pork, the gourmet venison, the sweet bird pie, and the salty fish are all engaged in a violent and dignified brawl. This is the grim, mainstream reality of the medieval digestive experience after a feast. Without the benefit of modern antacids or digestive enzymes, your body is on its own. The combination of massive quantities of protein and fat, washed down with sweet, yeasty alcoholic beverages, is a recipe for a sleepless night of epic proportions. The surfeit you are experiencing is not just a quaint medical term. It is a physical reality. You feel a wave of acid reflux, a fiery sensation creeping up your esophagus, tasting faintly of spiced wine and regret. This is heartburn, a sensation for which you have no name, only the miserable experience. You shift your position, rolling onto your side, hoping to find a configuration that will appease the angry god in your gut. But every movement just seems to roil the contents further. You are acutely aware of the weight and volume of what you have consumed. You can almost feel the sodden, indigestible mass of the trencher bread you didn't even eat, but which you absorbed by proxy. A kind of sympathetic indigestion. It feels as though you had swallowed a warm, heavy stone, and now you begin to contemplate the specific, weird details of medieval remedies for such a condition. If you were back in the hole, you might be offered a small cup of anise or fennel seed tea, both known for their carminative properties, their ability to relieve gas. A more extreme remedy, advocated by some physicians, was to induce vomiting, to simply expel the offending substances before they could do more damage. This was sometimes achieved by drinking a large quantity of lukewarm, salted water or by tickling the back of the throat with a feather egg rim, but sometimes necessary. Purge, lying here alone. However, your options are limited. You can only wait and suffer. This is where medical historians debate the true nature of medieval health. We often have a romanticized view of our ancestors as being more natural and robust, living simple lives in harmony with the land. But the reality, especially when it came to diet and digestion, was often one of extremes. For the peasantry, life was often a cycle of scarcity punctuated by brief periods of plenty after the harvest. For the nobility, it could be a relentless onslaught of rich, difficult minus digest foods that put immense strain on their systems. Gout, a painful form of arthritis directly linked to a rich diet of meat and alcohol, was rampant among the upper classes, often called the disease of kings. The suffering you are experiencing now was, for many of your peers, a regular and accepted part of life. A new sensation begins a series of small, gurgling pops and shifts in your lower abdomen. Gas, the fermentation of the sweet meat and the undigested starches, is now producing its own internal weather system. The pressure builds, creating a new and deeply uncomfortable form of bloating. You feel trapped, inflated from within. You stare up at the wooden beams of your ceiling, barely visible in the faint moonlight slanting through the single small window. The silence of the room is now your enemy. It gives you nothing to focus on but your own internal misery. You find yourself missing the noise of the feast, the distraction of the minstrel's song, the shouting of your drunken neighbors. In the whole, you were a participant in a communal experience of overindulgence. Here, alone in the dark, you are just a man with a stomachache. You close your eyes, trying to will yourself to sleep, but it's impossible. Your body is too busy with its own urgent, internal business. The night stretches before you, an infinite expanse of discomfort, and you realize, with a fresh wave of despair, that the memory of the meal is not the only thing that will haunt you. The ghost of the trencher, that heavy, grease-soaked slab of bread, is still with you. It is not just a memory, it is a physical presence. It is the indigestible core of the suffering you are now enduring, the final, leaden protagonist in the tragedy of your dinner. You lie perfectly still in the dark, but inside you, there is a riot. Your stomach is not a stomach, it is a crime scene, and every dish from the feast is both a victim and a suspect. The primary culprit, the leading ghost haunting the entire sorry affair, is the trencher, who didn't even eat it. You heroically passed it on to the squire, a noble sacrifice, but in a cruel twist of sympathetic magic, your body feels as though you did. The memory of its greasy, sagging weight is so vivid, so potent, that it has become a physical presence in your gut. Your mind, in its feverish, sleepless state, begins to obsess over the squire's final act. You picture him, the hollow minus-legged youth, picking up your discarded trencher, and now, in your mind's eye, you are the one eating it. You feel the imagined weight of it in your hands. It's heavy, damp, and coolly greasy to the touch. The top is a slick, semi-minus congealed surface of fattened sauce, while the underside is hard, dry, and dusty from the tablecloth. This is the mainstream historical reality of the trencher as a food item. It was sustenance, but it was sustenance of the lowest order, made from coarse flour, a mix of wheat and dry cold meslin, or even barley for the lower tables. It was designed for durability, not flavor. The act of eating your trencher was a sign that you are either very hungry, very poor, or very drunk. It was the medieval equivalent of licking your paper plate clean. In your feverish imagination, you lift the trencher to your mouth. The smell hits you first, a complex and deeply unpleasant bouquet of stale bread, cold mutton fat, the sour tang of vinegar from the fish course, and the cloying sweetness of honey. You take a bite. The resistance is formidable. The edges of the trencher, untouched by the sauces, are as hard as wood. It's a workout for your jaw. A loud, grinding, crackling effort. Your teeth, which are not in the best condition to begin with in this age of coarse diets and non-existent dentistry, ache with the strain. And here we get to a weirdly specific and uncomfortable detail: the dental cost of such a meal. Medieval teeth were, by and large, in a state of constant struggle. The diet was abrasive. Bread often contained grit from the millstones, and eating something as tough as a stale trencher would have been an act of significant wear and tear. You can almost feel the imagined pressure on a loose molar, the grinding of enamel, for the poor, who might have relied on such leftovers. This wasn't just an unpleasant meal. It was a long-term dental disaster in the making. You force your way through the hard crust to the center. Here, the texture changes. It is a soft, sodden, and utterly vile sponge. The taste is a chaotic slurry of every flavor from the feast. A culinary argument where everyone is shouting at once. There's the blandness of the pottage, the sharp heat of the mustard, the rich gaminess of the venison, the salty funk of the pickled fish, and the sweet stickiness of the honey. No single flavor is identifiable. It has all merged into a singular, horrifying taste of everything. It is the taste of regret. This raises a fascinating academic debate among nutritionists and historians. Was the trencher, or those who ate it, a net nutritional positive or negative? On one hand, it was a significant source of calories. For a starving person, this slab of carbohydrate and fat, however unappetizing, was a valuable source of energy. It was, quite literally, survival. On the other hand, the nutritional quality was abysmal. It was soaked in animal fats, rancid oils, and sugar, with very little in the way of vitamins or what we would now call good nutrients. Some historians argue that while it kept people from starving, a diet reliant on such leftovers could have contributed to a host of other health problems, creating a population that was simultaneously overfed on calories and undernourished. The imagined taste in your mouth is so vivid that a fresh wave of real nausea rolls through you. You sit up in bed, your body slick with a cold sweat. You realize the truth. You didn't eat the trencher, but the feast itself was the trencher, a single, massive, indigestible slab of excess. The various dishes were just different flavors being slopped onto the same, singular meal of overwhelming richness. You have dodged the bullet of eating the physical object, but you took the full force of its spiritual equivalent. Your body is now the plate, saturated with the oils and sauces of the night. Lying back down, you feel a final, gurgling shift in your gut. The battle is entering a new, more explosive phase, and you know, with a sense of impending doom, that you will not be a passive observer for much longer. The imaginary taste of the trencher has tipped you over the edge. The psychological distress has become a full-blown physical emergency. The churning in your gut is no longer a vague threat. It is an imminent promise. You throw your legs over the side of the bed, a desperate urgency propelling you. Your chamber, thankfully, is equipped with the medieval equivalent of a private bathroom, a small closet-like room called a guard-robe. You stumble into this tiny, dark space. The guard-robe is a marvel of medieval engineering and a testament to their unsentimental approach to bodily functions. It is, in essence, a stone or wooden bench with a hole in it, situated directly over a chute that leads down the outside of the castle wall. There is no flushing mechanism. Gravity is your plumber. The waste simply drops down the chute into the castle moat below, or onto a designated dung heap. This is the mainstream historical reality of castle sanitation. For the lord and his family, these private guard-robes were a significant luxury, a mark of status that separated them from the common folk who had to use communal latrines or simple chamber pots. The design was clever, but it came with its own set of problems. The chutes were a security risk, a potential entry point for edulous essence, and the smell, particularly in the summer, could be formidable, wafting up from the moat on a warm breeze. You sit on the cold, unforgiving stone seat, and the inevitable happens. The feast makes its violent, undignified exit. Your body, in its wisdom, has decided to reject the entirety of the evening's hospitality. The rich meats, the sweet wines, the pungent sauces, it all comes rushing out in a torrent of misery. And now for a weirdly specific and slightly horrifying detail. The concept of toilet paper does not exist. Your options for personal hygiene are limited and unpleasant. If you were a wealthy lord, you might use soft linen rags, but for most people, the common tool was a bundle of hay or straw, or even a handful of moss or leaves. You are faced with a choice between scratchy and even more scratchy. It is a moment that strips away all the pomp and ceremony of the feast, reducing you to the most basic, uncomfortable human realities. This is a topic that historians of daily life and sanitation are deeply interested in. How did these practices, or lack thereof, affect medieval health? The academic debate is ongoing. On one hand, the constant proximity to human waste, the contaminated moats, and the lack of hand-washing would have been a breeding ground for bacteria and disease, contributing to the high rates of dysentery and other intestinal ailments. On the other hand, some historians argue that because their immune systems were exposed to a wider range of microbes from birth, medieval people may have been hardier in some respects than our modern, sanitized bodies. The truth is likely that they were both tougher and far more likely to die from a simple infection that we would cure with a course of antibiotics. You finish your grim business in the guard-robe, feeling hollowed out, shaky, and utterly defeated. The violent purge has left you weak, but also strangely, blessedly empty. The intense pressure in your gut has been replaced by a tender, bruised feeling. You splash some cold water on your face from the pitcher in your room and crawl back into bed. Your body is exhausted. Your stomach is a tender blank slate. The physical torment, at least the most acute phase of it, seems to be over. You are no longer a walking vessel of digestive regret. You are just a man, in a bed, in the dark. But as your body calms down, your mind, which has been momentarily silenced by the physical emergency, begins to stir again. The feast has been exorcised from your stomach, but not from your memory. And a new, more philosophical question begins to form in the quiet of the pre-dawn hours. You think about the squire, easing your trencher. You think about the alms basket. You think about the food that was consumed and the food that was given away. And you begin to wonder about the strange, blurry line between charity and waste. The violence in your gut has subsided, leaving behind a fragile, hollowed out peace. You lie in the darkness, your body weak and trembling, but the acute, cramping pain is gone. In its place, a different kind of discomfort begins to bloom, a slow, creeping sense of moral unease. Your mind, now free from the immediate physical crisis, replays the final moments of the feast, not with nausea, but with a new, troubling clarity. You picture the two trenchers, your own, a sudden wreck, being passed to the ever-hungry squire, your neighbours, equally abused, being swept unceremoniously into the alms basket. The two acts seem so different, yet their starting point was the same, a piece of leftover, grease minus soaked bread. This is the mainstream historical context of medieval charity. It was a fundamental pillar of the Christian faith and a social expectation for the wealthy. To give alms to the poor was not just an act of kindness. It was a religious duty, a way to earn favor with God and to demonstrate one's piety to the community. The alms basket at the end of the feast was a visible, public performance of this duty. But as you lie there, you start to question the nature of that generosity. The lord of the castle provided a feast of staggering abundance, far more than any single person could possibly eat. The leftovers, including the used trenchers, were then distributed to the poor waiting at the gates. On the surface, it is an act of profound charity. But was it? The food given away was the refuse, the scraps, the very plates that the wealthy had already used and soiled. The trencher given to a beggar was not the same as the fresh bread served at the start of the meal. It was something lesser, something defined by its second-hand nature. This is where you stumble upon a weird and specific detail, a paradox at the heart of medieval charity. While giving was a virtue, there was often a clear, unspoken line between our food and their food. Some household account books from the period show specific grades of bread being baked, the finest white bread manchet for the Lord's table, a second minus dear whole wheat bread chetty for the other guests and high minus ranking servants, and a third, coarse, dark bread made of rye or barley, sometimes called horse bread, for the lowest servants and for the alms basket. The charity was built into the system, but so was the class distinction. You didn't just give food. You gave food that was appropriate for the recipient's station. This leads to a deep and fascinating academic debate among historians who study ethics. Religion and economics in the Middle Ages. Was the primary driver of medieval charity genuine compassion for the poor, or was it more about the salvation of the donor? Theologians of the time taught that giving alms could reduce one's time in purgatory. Therefore, the act of giving was a kind of spiritual transaction, an investment in one's own afterlife. The benefit to the poor person was, in a sense, a secondary consequence of the rich person's quest for salvation. This doesn't negate the real good that charity did. A hungry person was fed, but it complicates the motive. Was the Lord feeding the poor, or was he feeding his own soul? You think of the squire. You gave him your trencher not out of piety, but because he was sitting next to you and he was hungry. It was a direct, personal, and simple act. It was not a public performance or a spiritual calculation. It was just sharing. By contrast, the Lord's charity, funneled through the alms basket, feels grander, more institutional, but also more impersonal and, perhaps, more cynical. It was a way of dealing with waste, both food waste and the waste of society, the poor at the gates. This train of thought offers no comfort. It just replaces the physical churning in your stomach with a moral churning in your mind. The world feels full of complex, unanswerable questions. The simple certainties of your life have been broken down by the excesses of the night. You feel a profound weariness, a fatigue that is not just physical, but spiritual. You have been emptied, and now you are adrift. You turn your head towards the window. The grey light of dawn is strengthening, chasing the last of the shadows from your room. The night is over. The ordeal is finished. And as the new day begins, your body, finally, truly, and completely, gives up the fight. You feel a wave of dizziness, a final, heavy pull, and the complex thoughts about charity and waste dissolve into a simple, overwhelming need for oblivion. The grey light of dawn filters into the room, a silent, impartial observer to the wreckage of your night. You have been purged, physically and emotionally. The violent rebellion in your gut has given way to a fragile, tender truce. The complex moral gymnastics of your mind have wound down, leaving behind a profound, aching emptiness. You are a hollowed minus-out vessel, a ship that has been tossed and battered by a terrible storm and has finally washed up on a barren shore. You lie on your back, your eyes half minus open, watching the dust motes dance in the growing light. The world outside is beginning to wake up. You can hear the distant, muffled sound of a rooster crowing, a triumphant announcement of the day you thought would never come. Soon, the castle itself will stir. The servant will rise, The fires will be stoked, and the relentless, grinding routine of medieval life will begin anew. But you feel completely detached from it, as if you are listening to it from a great distance, or from the bottom of a deep well. Your body, having endured the onslaught of the feast and the subsequent violent eviction, has no reserves left. This is the mainstream historical experience that is often overlooked in tales of grand banquets, the brutal, physical aftermath. For every glorious hour of feasting, there were hours, or even days, of recovery. The human body is not designed for such extremes, and the consequences were a simple, unavoidable fact of life. Your current state of weak, tremulous exhaustion is the true price of admission for last night's spectacle. You close your eyes, and the image of the trencher floats into your mind one last time. It is no longer a symbol of gluttony or waste. It is just a piece of bread, a heavy, sad, forgotten piece of bread. It feels like a metaphor for your own body, something that was meant for sustenance but has been overloaded, abused, and left a soggy, useless wreck. You feel a strange, weary sympathy for that piece of bread. And this is where a final, weirdly specific detail of medieval life comes into focus. What happened to the idea of the trencher, while the bread plate itself slowly faded from use among the nobility, replaced by wood, pewter, and eventually ceramic? The word itself survived. A trencher man became a term for a hearty, voracious eater, a man with a prodigious appetite. The object disappeared, but its spirit, the idea of a man who could conquer a massive meal, lingered in the languid. The squire who ate your plate was a true trencher man. You, on the other hand, have proven to be the opposite. This linguistic survival is a subject of debate for historical linguists and social historians. How do certain words, tied to obsolete objects or practices, survive in a language? Often, it's because they capture a powerful social idea or a recognizable human type. The trencher man wasn't just about eating. It was about a certain kind of robust, unapologetic masculinity, an ideal of strength and vitality. The word survived because the ideal it represented survived, long after the bread plates were swept into the alms basket for the last time. Your thoughts are becoming slow and thick, like honey dripping in winter. The edges of your consciousness are blurring, the sharp focus of your anxiety finally dissolving into a soft, hazy fog. The rooster crows again, a little louder this time, but the sound seems to be coming from much farther away. The gurgling in your gut has quieted to a faint, distant murmur. The war is over. A peace treaty has been signed, not through victory, but through mutual, absolute exhaustion. You feel a gentle, pulling sensation, a slow, downward drift. It's not the unpleasant, churning descent of your earlier sickness. It is a soft, welcome slide into darkness. The last, lingering ghost of the feast, the memory of the taste of honeyed wine, the sight of the glittering sugar castle, the feel of the greasy meat on your fingers, all of it fades to black. You have survived the night. And now, at the very moment the rest of the world is waking up, your body is finally, mercifully, letting you go to sleep. The whole, definite lines of the room dissolve into a soft, grey haze. The lumpy, unforgiving straw of your mattress melts away beneath you, and you feel yourself floating in a space that is neither warm nor cold, but perfectly, neutrally still. The memory of the feast, with its noise and its smells and its overwhelming, relentless presence, recedes like a distant tide, leaving behind a smooth, silent shore. All the churning, the cramping, the desperate calculations of body and soul, they all just stop. You are drifting now, in a quiet, empty space. There is no taste in your mouth, no pressure in your gut. There is only the gentle, rhythmic, almost imperceptible rise and fall of your own breathing. It is a slow, easy rhythm, a current that carries you further and further away from the waking world. The ghost of the trencher, that heavy, burdensome thing, has finally become what it was always meant to be, nothing at all. It has been consumed by the quiet. And now, so are you. Let the silence wash over you. Let the stillness hold you. There is nothing left to digest, nothing left to regret. There is only this deep, dreamless, and profoundly empty peace.